Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is good to see everyone tonight on almost Christmas.
Almost Christmas.
Almost Christmas, a week from Christmas. And thank you very much for taking your time out. Come and join Black Scholars and Professionals as we hear the scholarship of these four wonderful people tonight. And we are excited to hear about from them. My name is Felicia Anderson. I am one of the associate directors of Black Scholars and Professionals within a Varsity Christian Fellowship. And I serve under Pastor Gary Hogans, who is our national director, and he has joined us. And turn a little something over to him in a minute. And we also have on the line Dr. Denise Margaret Thompson, who is our another associate director and also our immediate past director of BSAP. So we are really happy to see you here tonight to hear from everyone. I'm going to let Gary say one or two words before we share this PowerPoint. And then we will, oh, Denise is coming in.
Yeah, Dr. Denise, used to be here.
Denise,
Wonderful.
good to see you. And then Denise will share us a little bit about BSAP. And then we will begin to introduce our speakers. And they will go in the order of that they're introduced. Each will have 15 minutes, and we will have question and answer at the end. While they are making their presentations, if you have questions, write those in the chat, and I will try to consolidate. And ask the questions so that our the time can be used wisely. All right, Brother Gary, Sister Denise, and then I will come back.
Well, good evening, everyone. I don't have much to say. I'm just on vacation, but I couldn't miss this fantastic lineup of speakers that we have. So I'm just going to sit back and engage. And so just forget my back of my hotel room as I look kind of dark, but it's just good to be here tonight. God bless you all.
Excuse me, Sue, we can stop sharing in a minute because I think Denise is going to talk about BSAP, right, Denise?
Yeah, well, just to welcome everyone again, join in welcoming, because I think tonight we actually have people from across the IFES world joining in. I see we have folk coming in from Ghana. It's the middle of the night, literally like 12 a.m. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We have friends from CARIFES. We're doing this jointly with the Caribbean Fellowship of Evangelical Students as we celebrate the scholarship of people of African descent. And this is kind of in keeping with the UN's decade for people of African descent that ends next year. So we in the IFES world and in Black Scholars and Professionals are celebrating the range of scholarship. And when we talk about scholarship, I'll just explain, we're talking about both traditional scholarship, the scholarship of research, as well as the scholarship of application, the scholarship of teaching, and the scholarship of innovation. And so we'll be joining with other IFES movements across the world to celebrate our scholarship. We work in the academy. Black Scholars and Professionals is the focus ministry part of InterVarsity's graduate and faculty ministry, but we also work with undergrad students, and in some parts of the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, InterVarsity actually works with high school students. So over the next 4, 5, 6 months, we will be celebrating the scholarship of all of us. So I'm just delighted that we are all here tonight. Welcome. We will be hearing from folk here in the US, as well as from some of our sister movements in Haiti, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And so I'm just excited that we're here, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Brother Gary and Sister Denise. It is my distinct pleasure to Reverend Kimberly Blackford-French. Kimberly is Associate Ministry Director for the Southeast Region University in the U.S. She recently received an MDiv from Louisville Presbyterian Seminary. She is an ordained minister and associate minister at Bates Memorial Church, Louisville. She is married to Dr. Eric T. French, who is a pastor at Antioch Baptist Church in Louisville. And I can say, because I've known Kimberly probably since she was on city staff, I think she said 23 years, but she is one who serves her people with joy and gladness. So is just a delightful person. And I am really excited to hear from her tonight. Dr. Denise will introduce our next speaker.
Okay, so after Kimberly speaks, Paul Lewis from Jamaica will share his scholarship, and he's going to be talking about how should we then live, looking at apologetics, confronting the reality of brokenness in our world. Paul currently serves as GenSec, the General Secretary of Students Christian Fellowship and Scripture Union in Jamaica, brings 11 years of dedicated leadership to high school and collegiate ministries. As a Christian apologist and esteemed writer, Paul was honored with the 2015 International Young Writer of the Year Award. He holds a psychology degree from the University of the West Indies and an apologetics certificate from the International Academy of Apologetics. He's currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Cultural Apologetics at Houston Christian University. So he's one of our BSAP scholars since Houston Christian University is here in the US, actively engaged in Christian Life Fellowship in Jamaica, and has served as a former young adult leader.
Okay. I will introduce LaTricia Mitchell. LaTricia recently received her Master's of Social Work at Wayne State University. She is a former university staff, and she is a current volunteer with grad faculty ministries of university. She focuses, she is a mental health clinician as well as a social worker. She focuses on early childhood, mental health and wellness of Black families. She aims to contribute to the scholarship centering on the experience of Black boys and adolescents. And she has postmaster's work at Yale University. She also is an ordained minister in the AME Church. And LaTricia, I'm proud to say, as a former colleague, is that she also is a great lover of her people, very innovative and creative person. And I am really excited to hear what she's going to talk to us about tonight.
And after LaTricia speaks, we will hear from Samantha Porter. And I'm delighted to introduce her to you, to us. Samantha participated in the last Urbana conference, and I'll tell a little secret. Her daughter was one of my students here at Stanford University pursuing a master's. And I'm not sure if she's on tonight, but Samantha is here with us, and Samantha will be sharing about her research at St. Francis University as a PhD student there currently. She worked for 29 years as a teacher, currently on faculty at the St. Vincent's Community College, Division of Teacher Education, as a math educator for the last 11 years. She taught at multiple levels, including secondary, associate degree, undergraduate, and graduate levels. In addition to that, she worked as a mathematics curriculum specialist and provided consultancy to national curriculum development. Tonight, Samantha will be speaking on her work with beginning math teachers' perceptions of preparedness, looking at OECS, Teacher Education Program Transferability, on her work in education in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. She's been married for 26 years to Bishop Gilbert Porter, has 2 children, a daughter, Jody, one of my students, and a son, Jared. And after Samantha's our 4th speaker. The last speaker for this evening would be Dr. Leslie Jules. Dr. Jules is a Christian apologist and management specialist, the author of influential management books. One of them is a handbook for church management. His topic tonight would be from hopelessness to hopefulness, looking at church engagement for transformative impact. Dr. Jules served on the board of IFES Haiti, currently lives in North Carolina, but serves internationally, where he works with several countries in Africa and will be helping us with Francophone Africa and their sharing of their scholarship. Delighted tonight to welcome all 5 speakers and excited to hear what they're sharing from their work offered to Jesus in scholarship.
All right, Kimberly, the floor is yours.
There we go. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I get the honor of going first. I get to break the ice. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to share tonight just some of the work that I got to do as part of one of my classes in Div studies, and then also for my field education work. So first, I just wanted to talk about the project that I did for my intersectionality class, which was on race, gender, and class. And that's just talking about the leadership experiences of Black Christian women in evangelical spaces. Let's see. Oh, let's see if this works. There we go. Got it to go. So part of this comes out of my own story and my own experience. In particular, there was one day that I was coming into a work meeting. It was kind of a hard morning. I was just feeling the weight of a lot of things. I was wrestling with the Lord on a lot of stuff. And I was just kind of feeling heavy that morning. And then I got onto the meeting and I was looking at my other coworkers, and they were seemingly kind of happy-go-lucky, not a issue in the world, drinking their coffee and just, having a good la-di-da time. And so I was looking at that and I was like, something about this doesn't feel right. That why does it feel like I'm carrying so much and they seemingly are not? And so it just led me to want to kind of, look more into that. Like, is that me? And it probably was some of me, but also are there other people who are experiencing some of the same things that I'm experiencing at work? So it led me to ask this question: do Black women have to deal with more issues to get to the leadership table? And then once we're there, once we're invited in, are we carrying more than other people? And so in this project, I focused on InterVarsity. So I focused on people that were part of the organization that I worked with. I interviewed 9 different people from various age ranges, various years on staff, and asked them questions around their leadership experience. So these questions that are here. So things around, what were your top experiences that shaped your leadership development? How has suffering been a part of your leadership development? How has being a part of a multi-ethnic organization shaped you as a leader? And how did the Black Campus Ministry staff community, how did that help you with your leadership development? So I felt like I wanted to give y'all a couple of quotes from the people that I interviewed. And so this one stood out to me in particular because I felt like it summarized a lot of what a lot of us were feeling. So it says, yes, Black women do carry more. We get up every day and deal with sexism, racism, watching our people be murdered regularly, sometimes people we know. We see our people mistreated socioeconomically. We watched a racist man be president for 4 years, and then we'd go to work every day and tell people about Jesus as Christians supported him. It feels like you carry a backpack of weights every day when others don't. And I'm excited to tell people about Jesus, but to have to carry these burdens every day along with fundraising. Some days I just want to quit because it feels like you're complicit in an unjust system. But I feel like part of our role is to correct the system that is hurting people. It's hard. You feel like you're contributing to the problem, but also trying to fix it. You almost can't think too much about it because you'll start to spiral. So I think for us Black women who were kind of working in the space, there was just the weight of being a Black woman, but then also having to deal with being in this evangelical space and all of what that meant in our society. And then just how does it all kind of work together? And it's just a lot to think about and a lot to carry. Something else, some of the a couple other quotes that just wanted to mention, just so you could kind of hear the voices and kind of the struggles that people were talking about. One said, I never felt I was on the same playing field as others with leadership development. I came on staff at university and fundraising was a bear. And my supervisor didn't know any better to stop giving me a salary increase. I was maxed out and stressed because I kept having to raise more. I went to the vice president at the time and he said there was nothing we could do. I was willing to work part-time because I loved the job, but I was told that I couldn't. I left university for 10 years and I left bewildered. Another ministry within university eventually courted me and brought me back on part-time. They cared for me well. Another person said, we do leadership activities without knowing it's leadership. People had to explicitly help me recognize the things I was doing was leadership. White men assume that they are leaders. I had to hear someone say, you do this because you have the gift of leadership. And so again, it's just kind of these different struggles that are there. And with this person, it's their sense of, white men, there is an assumption of leadership. They just step into it. But for Black women at times that it's because of the society that we're in, we're not always affirmed in our leadership. And so it had to be something that was called out. Maybe one more that I'll read is just, it says, Black women will keep going. We are resilient. This will help us gain leadership skills, even if we don't have the language for it. If we feel obligated, we will pour our all into it, but at what cost? We do gain from leadership development in white evangelical spaces, but we do it at a high cost. It's helpful now because I'm in a healthy space and I have a healthy supervisor, but without this, it's not worth the cost. I wouldn't want to do this in another white evangelical space. So again, I just wanted to read a couple of those quotes just so you could kind of hear the voices of some of the women and some of the things that we talked about. Kind of as a summary, to summarize their experiences, what multiple people talked about was having to continue to work amid racial violence and still being expected to produce. Also, feeling like having to carry our own burdens and the burdens of others was a big thing. The stereotype of being a superwoman, and then having to deal with the constant and financial, emotional burdens of fundraising was a big one. And then there were a lot of microaggressions. People felt overlooked, like they weren't asked to use their gifts or that their voices weren't heard, maybe that they were judged by white male standards and metrics for leadership, and having to deal with the lack of cultural competency from supervisors. But in spite of that, some people felt like they experienced a lot of growth, that it was hard, but they stayed because they felt called by God, and they felt like even though at times it was hard, that God still used it to develop them as leaders. And they also felt like university was good because it was a place of exposure. They were exposed to a higher standard of leadership, and they got training and equipped for leadership and received a spiritual foundation for leadership that they didn't find in other places. And then also just the idea of the Black campus ministry community, that was a place of refuge, a place where leadership was called out. I know that was my own personal experience, that it was one of the first places where I heard someone say that I was a leader, and it's what kept most of us on staff. So just some conclusions from it was that yes, Black women do tend to carry more in their leadership development and just overall leadership than other people, personal and work-related things, but there are benefits to still working in a space, evangelical space like InterVarsity. There were recommendations from the Black women to other Black women, and some of those were to look for life outside of InterVarsity. Own your own narrative about yourself and your work, to find mentors inside and outside of the organization, find a healthy community to help you decompress, pursue higher education at some point, and to choose when you want to carry the weight, and then when you want to lay it down. Make a plan for leadership development and include development outside of InterVarsity. So those are just a couple of recommendations. And then recommendations for other people to want to partner with Black women. So particularly people like supervisors. One was just to communicate. Don't assume that you know what a Black woman is going through, or what her experience is. Talk to her, listen to her, seek to understand where things aren't clear, advocate for stretch opportunities. Spiritual formation and conversations is helpful. Black women really appreciate spiritual leadership. Seek to be a bridge person between the organization and Black women, especially it can be helpful to have somebody to translate culture for both Black women and the organization, to make sure that the org isn't just requiring conformity, and that Black women can engage well with other leaders. Call out leadership qualities in Black women and look for things maybe that don't fit the norm. Recognize everything that Black women may be carrying, and so give space for self-care, space for finishing deadlines, and just be allowed to not fit into typical molds for the organization. Advocate for what's in the best interests of Black women and not just for the ministry itself. And then give anti-racist pastoral care and deal with white supremacy that's at work in yourself and the organization. So that's a little bit of the Black women in leadership experiences in Black evangelical spaces. Sorry about that. And so for the second part, I'm just going to touch on this. It's spiritual healthcare for Black men. This was something that I focused on as part of my chaplaincy internship for my field education during seminary. I actually didn't get a lot of chances to engage with Black men while I was doing my chaplaincy internship the way that I wanted to. And so, and there wasn't a lot of people around who were doing kind of focused work around spiritual care for Black men. So I had to kind of go out and seek some information. So this comes out of what I found in seeking things out. So a lot of this information is gathered from Nicholas Greer's Care for the Mental and Spiritual Health of Black Men. He talks about having a hope to keep going spirituality and having a hope to keep going framework of care and counseling when working with Black men. And so that centers around really embracing hope and embracing a spirituality that maintains kind of this belief that good things are going to happen in Black men's lives and in the lives of other marginalized, vulnerable, and oppressed people. It's about nurturing survival and liberation and healing and flourishing in Black men, and just taking seriously the relationships that Black men have with one another and in the larger world. That community is really important for care for Black men. And then kind of the image that stood out from the reading as the way to represent spirituality for Black men was the movie Stomp the Yard. And so kind of Stomp the Yard is a movie about a kid who goes to college and engages in fraternity. And so it's this idea that spirituality is both communal and individual for Black men. So it's communal, the brotherhood with other men. You get support from other people who, in particular, like in stepping, who are supporting and encouraging them. But then also there is this idea that along with the community, that the individual needs to be nurtured as well. And so there's an individual, but they are because of the whole. So that Ubuntu African spirituality. And so he talks about kind of 6 forms of spirituality, or kind of portals that Black men use to connect with spirituality. So that would be prayer and meditation, music, and art, other forms of creativity to express themselves, connection to the people, ancestors in the universe. And that's not necessarily like ancestor worship. That's more so kind of like connecting with the people who came before you. So that could be family members. It could be people in history that you admire, but kind of thinking about who influences you and why, whose shoulders are you standing on, being connected with yourself, having a moral compass, finding things of inspiration and motivation. So like scripture and encouraging words. And then kind of, he doesn't have this as one of the 6 portals, but he mentions it in the book, and I feel like it's really important. And that's liberating activity. And so that's seeing spirituality as participating in liberating activity that actively engages in the work of helping people be liberated. And so it's kind of embodying what you believe. And I think it helps give Black men this sense of hope and worth and purpose as they are living out, really helping themselves, embracing kind of agency to helping themselves be free and helping others be free too. So, and then kind of just to finalize, he kind of talks about if you're going to have a hope to keep going spirituality, that a cycle of change that you have to engage with. And so part of that is self-reflection. What is happening in my life? Self-awareness, understanding what's happening in your world and how you participated in it. Self-regulation, being able to cope constructively with negative images and expectations that are placed upon a Black man based upon what society says. Motivation, that Black men must be motivated to pursue life-giving options for their lives despite the negative images and expectations. And then the Black men must develop and maintain resilience that helps them to continue on paths of survival and flourishing. So that's my time. Thank you all for letting me share.
Thank you very much, Kim. Brother Paul?
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Let me just bring mine up.
And a reminder, you can put comments, thoughts, ideas, questions in the chat.
And please, giving signals.
All right. All right. So let me firstly say thank you to the organizers for allowing me to share on this topic, how should we then live? Really appreciated the previous presenters' session and looking forward to the others. So let's jump right into it. All right, so why this topic? So a few years back, there's a former student of mine who she started a writing initiative, and through that initiative, she wanted to do some recorded topical sessions. And one of them was on the importance of a biblical worldview. She knew I was writing for Christian Today Australia at the time. So she asked me if I could make a contribution. And so because of that, it forced me to think more deeply and to delve a bit more deeply into the topic, more than I probably would have in the past. And so from that podcast episode became a paper on the importance of a biblical worldview. And from that paper, I was able to write an article for Christian Today Australia, and then also share the presentation in different settings. Now, one of the main things I think the paper forced me to think about was the main question I think people were asking when they're thinking about the importance of a biblical worldview, namely the question of relevance. They wanted to know, what does it look like with boots on the ground walking in terms of the point of application? They've heard different messages preached, but what's the point of application? And so the objective of this paper or sharing today would really be demonstrate effectively the relevance of the Christian worldview, highlight points of application that I think has worked for me, and then really commend this to you as an idea to reflect on with feedback, of course. So what will I share on, having said all of that? I'll be sharing on three main things: understanding who we are, our identity, purpose, and our origin; living for more, that we are effectively internally transformed, and then we have an outlook that changes; and then lastly, an eternal perspective that gives us confidence in the present. So who are we? Starting question. But in order to answer that, I'll be actually pulling on different passages and making comments as I move along. So for this one, I want to look on Psalm chapter 8, verses 48, not the entire psalm, but there's a particular section. In that psalm, the psalmist reflects on the creation of God, the grandeur of it, and he asks some specific questions. He says, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings." Now, the first point I want to make a series of points as go along. But the first point I want to note is that the passage speaks about making in verse 5, which I think establishes the first point of identity for us, that we are firstly created beings, specifically made in his image, as we see in Genesis 1, verse 27. Equally, or more importantly, we are created by God, which shapes a fundamental understanding of our identity, that we exist because of God, we live before God. Secondly, we are made with a purpose. In verses 5 to 8, the psalmist speaks of God creating, but also gives purpose to man. He says, "You have given him dominion," and then speaks of different aspects of that. So far we see man was created to live before God with a specific purpose. We see in Psalm 8 how he glorifies God as he lives before him. So effectively, all these, I think, come together to describe man's identity. One, created by God; two, created by God with a purpose; and three, that man was, the aim was that man was supposed to point back to God so that all could see his majesty. Effectively, that he would glorify him. We see that in the initial part of Psalm 8 and the latter part of Psalm 8, where the psalmist ascribes majesty to God. Now, I want us to step back a bit and appreciate a bit of the significance of this in action, because we've said a bit so far. That God is mindful of and cares for man shows us why, as Christians, I believe that we should treat each other with care and dignity. It also shows why I may take issue with the lack of care and dignity shown to all men. So it effectively informs how I see you, my fellow man, and how I treat you. Now, we've said quite a bit on the positive side, but there is another element that I think Francis Schaeffer, in his book, Escape from Reason, can help us with a bit. There's a quote that he points to where he says, "Why is he so wonderful and yet so flawed?" So we agree with him on the initial part. He's with us so far. Why is he so wonderful and yet so flawed? Who is man? Who am I? Why can man do these things that make man so unique, yet why is man so horrible? Why is it? This question, I think, posed by Schaeffer is indeed it's an important one, and one I think we need to pay attention to as we think about the first point of identity. Because in locating man's identity, the psalmist doesn't just show us the basis for his dignity, but it also sheds light on his duality, the sense in which there are two parts that we're seeing about man. That man is not only made in the image of God and therefore has inherent dignity, but man is also fallen because of what the Bible describes as sin. So the question the psalmist asks here, to follow along on that point, I think it shows up in Psalm 8, that the question the psalmist asks in Psalm 8 is most profound, and I think is helpful for us to shed some more light on that same fact. He says, who is man? But if you look on that part a little bit more, the psalmist states the question with a bit of incredulity, a kind of surprise. And the question I think that arises is, what about man makes him question the mindfulness of God and God's care for him? I would suggest that before the majesty of God, there's a sense of distance or alienation I think man can feel. Consider Isaiah before God in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 to 5, or Peter before Jesus in Luke chapter 5, verse 8. Both men, when faced with the majesty of God, retreated and felt so far. So yes, we are created by God. 1, 2, created with a purpose. And 3, to bring glory to God. There's a sense in which we now see where man is also alienated from God because of sin and needs to be in right relationship. So we've located a bit of man's identity in both senses. Now there's something that we also need to look on in our second point, living for more, in light of what we said before. In my previous point, as I said, we mentioned how sin alienated caused distance between man and God. And we see how this has impacted man in two senses. Impacted us in two senses. How we live surely before God, which is either continued alienation or being brought near to God. We'll speak about the latter in a bit. But then there's also how we live with each other. So sin has alienated us from each other. We've seen that. Where, yes, there's a sense in which we're far from God, but we're also not as we are supposed to be with each other. So there's clearly a certain sense in which sin has disrupted our relationship. So there's not a complete harmony, love, or even a sense of consideration. And one may argue or say that surely people who don't know Jesus, not believers, they show love and consideration. That's very true. But I think the point to be made is the fact that there's disruption at all still, I think, is a point of concern at this particular point. So consider even the story of Cain and Abel. So murder enters the garden for the first time, but not murder only. There's also a sense of a dismissal of his responsibility to his brother. Because he asked the question when he asked, where is your brother? Am I my brother's keeper? There's a sense of a neglect of his social responsibility. That's really not how things are to be. And it's an important point to consider, because what this shows us is that not only do we live as men before God, we see that a little as we mentioned before, but we are also living with each other. And so the Christian worldview is not only pointing out where we're going wrong so far, but we will get to a bit of how it applies to even the solution. But in this particular sense, how is the biblical worldview applicable here? To draw on that a bit, I want to use an example from an author, C.S. Lewis, in his book, Mere Christianity. In it, in speaking about morality, he draws on a fleet of ships. For him, he says that in order for a fleet of ships to get to where it's going to, it needs to be seaworthy, it needs to know where it's going, and it needs to sail in the same direction. Without that, there can be collision, you end up somewhere where you're not supposed to, or if it's not seaworthy, it can sink or, of course, collide. And some of these points, I think, they're very important, as the analogy, I think, can be carried over to how we see how men live with each other. So in the same way, for man, there's the need, surely, for us to live in harmony with each other, but there's also a need for internal harmony. And this is how I think the biblical worldview is applicable. Because while the scriptures would agree that order is essential and laws by extension are necessary in order for that to be, the Bible goes a step further. It speaks about it not being enough for the laws to be in place. It speaks rather about the need for morality and laws to be eternalized. We see it, for example, Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 26 to 27. where where the writer speaks about God writing his taking away our heart of stone and giving us a heart of flesh to know him, but then also goes a step further to say that we may do his law. Now that's important, I think. I'll pull on one more example and then move on. In Carolyn McCauley's book, While the World Watched, it's a biographical work. She was one of the ladies, I think, that was involved in the Birmingham church bombing in 1963. Four girls, I think, died, but she survived. And she speaks about a particular court case where the court ruled in favor of the schools to desegregate the schools. And she recalls that even after the courts ruled in that way, there was a particular aggressive figure, Bull O'Connor, I think was his name. He dismissed that rule, and the point she made is that the school stayed segregated. Now the question is, if that's the case, are rules enough? The point I think the Bible makes is that our laws and the sense of morality needs to be internalized. We have to want to do these things. So a point of application to consider quickly. I think in Ephesians, Paul speaks about the idea of the Gentiles and the Jews and how there was hostility. He mentions that in verse 16. But he goes on later to celebrate a unity that emerged. And one of the things that's important is because what that tells us is that at the heart of that unity that was created, it was because of the death of Christ, where it broke down the dividing wall of hostility and made unity possible. Now, what this does for us as Christians is that it gives us confidence in speaking about the gospel as relevant in a space where we see hostility, where even with the presence of law, there is the inner compulsion to live in a certain way, where man wants to live as he should. There's also now a more superior standard that is truly transcendent. When man is transformed, he now lives for God, which is bigger than what is before him. And this is important. Consider two verses, and then I'll move on quickly. Psalm 51 and Matthew chapter 25. In Psalm 51, David speaks about killing Uriah for Bathsheba. And one of the points he says, against you, O Lord, have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. Now, some would use that passage to say everyone should mind their own business. But I think the passage is actually speaking to who he truly sinned against when he killed Uriah. It was God he truly sinned against, firstly, before he got to his fellow man. We see that even with Jesus speaking about, if you did not do this to the least of these, you didn't do it for me. And that's a helpful point to consider, because what that gives us is effectively a transcendent, something bigger, something that informs our present relationships. Last point I want to make is an eternal perspective that gives confidence, in the present. So we have spoken so far about who we are, identity, community, and created by God. We've spoken about why we are how we are as mankind, both individually and collectively. We have spoken of not just a problem, but a solution that the Bible speaks of. And all these points are meant to address how we live, surely. But there's a final point to consider, the reality of the eternal perspective. Life looks like what we enjoy, surely it does. It also speaks about the reality of it speaks about the reality of what we must endure, what we must abstain from, sacrifice and hardships. It's a total package that life carries with it. And so Paul, I think, equally mentions that in his letter in Corinthians, where he speaks about, what do I gain if you upon me speaking are far with beasts at Ephesus, and the dead are not raised? And let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. At the end of the day, when we have faced hard and difficult choices, where do we turn? So effectively, he resigns himself to the present moment, resigns himself to momentary pleasure. So the freeing thing about an eternal perspective that I think the biblical worldview offers or speaks about is that the best part of my life is not wrapped up in this life. It can inform how I make our decisions, what I'm able to endure, but even the fact that when I may suffer loss, I may not fall to pieces. This, I think, I want to commend to us, is why I think we can consider the relevance of the biblical worldview. Yes.
Thank you so much, Brother Paul.
Welcome. Over to you.
I'm prepared to share my
LaTricia.
screen. Thank you. There we go. And I won't, as any good preacher says, even if they're not telling the truth, I won't be before you long. I'm assuming at least I got one laugh out of that moment. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to share my experiences and my research with you. It's just been such a pleasure already to learn and to receive from others here in this space, and I am just in awe that I get to be among the number this evening. So my name is LaTricia Mitchell, as has been said, and I'll talk briefly about some of my research around depression and prenatal African-American fathers. And so you'll hear me use Black and African-American interchangeably throughout the course of me presenting, but I'm specifically speaking of African-American men and fathers that are from the United States of America. So I'll share a little bit of background. So this will be a little bit more technical. I will hope to be a little inspirational, but I think this research is a little bit more scientific. So I'll just share it with you, and then I'll get into what I call the preach, the things that are, I think, useful for all of us to be thinking of as we think about Black fathers. But the background I think is important for us to be thinking of is that studies have shown that Black fathers are reported to be some of the most present in their children's lives. This is the data from a CDC study that showed that the Black fathers were the most involved across all of all the metrics that they used to discuss and identify what was most important to them. And it really goes against what we sort of see and what we see in the media about Black fathers and about fathers in general. We often see that fathers are considered to be absent and or people who contribute harm mostly to a family system. But research also really shows that Black fathers are the most consistent, the most insistent, and the most present across the board in their children's lives. And so it is our role as people who care for and advocate for Black families to be reminded of the truth for ourselves and to work through our own stuff. We all have our own stuff when it comes to our identities around fatherhood and fathers. And so I have begun to say to some of my colleagues in social work and in mental health spaces that what you believe about fathers often becomes what you believe about men. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially if you are like me, a non-man, whether that's a woman or any of your other gender identities, et cetera. And so I'm just going to be thinking about. So fatherhood involvement, as we also know, though, is one of the most important factors for a child's positive outcome in their life, including higher self-esteem, improved physical health, physiological health, and increased academic success. Of course, we know many, many people who live great and do well because God is our Father first, and God tends to father people no matter who's in the room. So God will do that work no matter what. But we also know that African-American fathers and African-American men are exposed to increased adversity compared to other fathers in the United States. And over time, those exposures to trauma and other what we call adverse childhood experiences, those things can often result in psychopathology and in mental health challenges. So I'll be specifically speaking about prenatal depression today. And so depression is one of the most common disorders that impact people who are in the middle of having children. That's called being in the perinatal phase. And so it impacts mothers, which we often talk about nowadays. It's a growing conversation, but I also am committed to talking about that when it comes to fathers. So I'll be sharing about a subset of research that was done. So I'm a part of a research team, or at least I was in my master's program. One of my faculty conducted a research study between about 100 folks or so in Detroit, where we are located, and more than half of those couples were Black couples. Most of them were, really, and so that means that half of that data comes from Black fathers and Black men. And so I particularly was curious about their identity, their experiences, and their well-being. And I wanted to focus particularly on the risk factors that they face that are associated with their symptoms of depression. So here comes a graph. All right, I'll explain it. So we have some self-report survey data that was collected from these parents. And we wanted to sort of identify the expected parents in urban environments. And so because I was curious for initially, just like I want to learn about the experiences that these Black men have, and what are the different factors that we measured that we can see, is there a strong relationship between any of them, and which ones sort of float to the top as things to be relevant, that might be relevant. And I was mostly curious about mental health conditions and how those relate to different factors that can contribute to well-being, or be a risk factor if they're not present, to contribute to psychopathology or mental health challenges. So I was particularly curious about childhood trauma, mindfulness, self-esteem, a sense of resilience, and then a parenting sense of competence. And by that, I just mean how confident and how competent do you feel in your ability to parent either your children that you already have or the children that will be on the way. And I noticed that overall, each of these things had a strong relationship with depression. So the asterisk in the graph indicates a strong relationship. So, and they indicate, and I'll go into some further detail. So, then they're all pretty straightforward in this sense. So for those people who had practices of mindfulness and demonstrated like that they held values that reflect mindfulness, they had lower incidences of depression and depressive symptoms. And for those Black men who indicated a higher sense of self-esteem, they also reflected a lower depression symptoms. And for those who had a higher sense of resilience, they also had lower depression symptoms. And if they indicated a lower sense of competence as parents, they also indicated higher depressive symptoms. And for those who had a more background experience of childhood trauma or traumatic childhood experiences, the people who had more of those experiences also had higher rates of depression. Many of these things are consistent as we would think about them for all people. So you would figure that anybody would have these challenges, but what I found important about this study too was just to see what would stick. So if I were to do this study again with Black moms, would these be the top 5 things that relate most to depression? Probably not. It's very possible. I can't say for sure, but there are things that affect all people differently. And for these Black men, the things that felt most associated with depression in these situations were self-esteem, mindfulness, resilience, a sense of competence as a parent, and childhood trauma. So let me speak to I'm just going to get to the results here, because there's a lot of opportunity for what this is. So I think when we talk about depression, it can often feel a little heavy and difficult. And the experience for Black men as they await a child is a pretty complex experience. And I think there are some men in here who might be able to speak to that, those who are fathers, or those who care for children in their own ways, or those who are even dreaming of becoming parents one day. There are lots of things in the United States that people often are thinking about when it comes to what it means to be a Black person and a Black man. And you have to many people hold these stories in them about stereotypes about Black fathers and Black men all throughout their experience of being a parent. And so one of the opportunities that I hope to be a part of one day would be to continue to do more research, to interview and to grow, to understand the stories of more people, particularly Black men and expectant Black fathers, about their hopes, their dreams for this work and for their fatherhood. Because I think to see what is it that people are longing for and hoping to see can really help us to identify where people could use more support. But there is research that has already been done that I'll share at the end in my next slide, of some great folks who are doing the work as well, some colleagues of mine. And so I will speak specifically to the results of the data, which would suggest that it's really important that these Black fathers, that all Black fathers, have access to mental health supports, and they may not look the way that people expect them to. So I say that to say, I think that what people often experience as sort of mental health supports, which was people just often say, just get a therapist, which is great. I'm a therapist, so I would say, yes, get one. But I would also suggest that there just are all sorts of ways to get mental health care, because while it is true that the Black community has a sort of quote unquote distrustful or mistrustful relationship with mental health care, we have come this far by faith. And so that means that by faith and by lots of other things that have gotten us this far. And so really important to validate the work that has already happened throughout generations, and to make sure that those things that have gotten us as far as we have, whether that's involvement in a faith community, mentorship, both formal and informal. I love when my sister mentioned sort of fraternal organizations and things like that that help bring people together. Psychotherapy, of course, and then medical care. I mean, even just like a basketball league, right? Like things that help create sustainability for someone that can really help protect against some of these factors that can contribute to depression for Black men particularly, but also for Black fathers in this case. And so as we have seen, there's like a lot of opportunity because there's a lot of rise in research and awareness around mental health concerns for Black families and Black parents, particularly Black moms. And it's important to include Black fathers and Black families in those stories because otherwise, we will continue to perpetuate these ideas that Black men and Black fathers don't need help, that they don't need support, that they don't care about their mental health, when the data does not support that at all. So we want to be able to support men and Black fathers in this work so that they can truly fully engage and get the help that they need. And so I wanted to also identify just potential alternatives. So for mental health care for Black fathers, so that might look like a focus group, unconventional group therapy. It's important to find Black male therapists. There are some that exist. I recently got tapped on the shoulder by someone who's also in this session right now to continue to share those lists with people because they do exist. And finding a safe therapist. They may not be Black, they may not be a man, they may not be a woman, but someone that you can trust to engage with. And I particularly am also committed in the research to identify how these mental health challenges, show up in expectant Black fathers and Black men, because it's important to think about the language that we use to describe mental health challenges, because for most of the time, the stories have been told by certain perspectives, predominantly Eurocentric perspectives. And so much of like the diagnostic books that exist sometimes are told from those perspectives. And so for example, there are things that we need to be able to be mindful of that maybe people say in their own casual conversation that are mental health concerns, mental health symptoms, or just things that the body experiences when going through stress or trauma, that we maybe might hear, that as a therapist, I might hear someone say, but unless I was trained to be aware of that language, I may not know that that is a symptom of a certain condition that I've been trained to learn about. So for example, one of the first things I realized, I don't know who else has ever heard this before, but I've heard plenty of my elders say, "Oh, my nerves are bad. Don't talk to me today. Give me some space. My nerves are bad." And I, as a child, knew to respect anyone who said that and get out of the way, because that meant that they were not trying to engage and that they were more sensitive to their environment and loud noises, too many questions, getting in your personal space. That's all you're doing too much. However, once I came to realize, oh, that's another way to that can be a really useful way to describe being overstimulated by your environment. It's a great way to describe feeling anxious that day. It's a great way to describe not getting enough sleep. But we don't always use that terminology to describe what is a physiological, psychological experience that someone is having. And if you're not aware of those things, and if there isn't an assessment that can ask those kinds of questions, we won't get those stories told, and those people won't get the help that they come to you needing and asking for. And so I really hope for some of my research to also make it to the policymakers that create assessments and people that implement these things, like in doctors' offices, for example, because these questions need to be asked in a way that help people understand them. We really easily translate things in other languages when it's useful, but then other forms of cultural language also need to be translated as well. So I will share a little bit of this research. My research in this paper is not yet published. I have just been presenting it in different places and spaces. I do have some research published about other work, but not about Black fatherhood just yet. So I have some colleagues that have some great research about this that I'm happy to share as I close. But I have 2 more minutes, thanks to Dr. Thompson. So I'm gonna say 2 more things just real quick as facts that I want to make sure people understand, because I think this often comes up when I have this conversation, and so wanted to share this briefly. Trauma does not doom anyone to being a bad parent. I just want to be 100% clear about that. And studies have actually shown that parents who have adverse childhood experiences are most intentional about getting support for their children and for their families, because they know that they want to be cycle breakers. So they're people who pray to make a change and see a difference, and who long to be the person or the community that changes things for their family and for their family systems. So depression studies can be a little depressing. So I just want to be very clear that trauma does not have the final say. Even some of these doctors don't have the final say about definitions and diagnoses. Jesus has the final say about what happens in the family and what happens for a father in their life and a child and their outcomes. And so it is up to us as people who pray and people who love Jesus and love each other and love Black people and Black families and Black children and Black fathers to be hopeful as well as we support people and think through what they need, because we all have a part to play in this work of mental health care, whether you're a clinical researcher or student or anything else or not. Thank you so much.
Hey, good night, everyone. And I have had a tremendous learning experience so far. Great work, everyone. And thank you to all the persons who organized this session, for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share my work tonight. Okay. My research is entitled Beginning Mathematics Teachers' Perception of Preparedness, an OECS Teacher Education Program. And in the background there, those are some pictures of my past students. So you can see we are still wearing uniforms in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm just going to share a bit about myself, who I am. I am one of 3 children born into a working class family in a small rural village called Fairhall in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My personal life and professional opportunities throughout my career has driven my passion for increasing teacher quality. As a high school student from a low-income family, I struggled with learning mathematics until I experienced good teaching. Hence, I felt compelled to conduct a research study that will allow me to investigate elementary teacher pedagogy and its relationship to the teaching of mathematics. I am opting for teaching philosophies that promote equal opportunities and social justice due to my growing understanding of issues of power and privilege informing the lack of achievement in mathematics amongst learners in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. From hereafter, I will be saying SVG. Now, history paints a complex context for this research. My homeland, SVG, is a former British colony. History confirms that our only national hero, Carib Chief Joseph Chatteray, was ambushed and brutally murdered as the British sought to remove Garifuna citizens from their homes. Colonial society in SVG consisted of an elite white minority that owned the means of production, a small East Indian community, while most of the population were enslaved Black Africans. Attitude towards mathematics in SVG. In SVG, it has become socially acceptable, even by successful learners, to admit a dislike of mathematics, given the traditional way the subject is commonly taught and the perceived failure experienced by so many students from the lower echelons of society. The annual percentage rates for the Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate mathematics attainment hides the worrying high level of inequality in achievement and participation among students from different groups. There remain a strong correlation between achievement in school mathematics and social class. In SVG, the highest failure rates are among students from low-income families. Many Vincentian students have gained a place at the university because of their privileged upbringing and schooling. Given the role school mathematics plays as a critical filter, these differences in achievement and participation inevitably leads to the perpetuation of social inequalities. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has emphasized an urgent need to increase the number of learners who are sufficiently proficient in mathematics. In an emergent resource economy, the limited number of mathematically proficient learners enter the workforce each year act as a constraint to the growth of the country. Hence, if the country should improve the learning outcomes in mathematics, to do that, mathematics teaching and assessment practices also must be improved. Scholars argued that to prepare pre-service teachers in ways that foster the development of effective teaching practices and pedagogies, teacher education programs should increasingly emphasize a variety of teaching and assessment strategies to help bring about reform in the teaching and learning of mathematics. The purpose of this research is to examine beginning teachers' perception of their preparedness for teaching and to examine further the transition to teaching and the effectiveness of initial teacher education programs in preparing them for the school environment. This study is important since improvements in students' learning depend on substantial large-scale changes in how teachers are prepared and supported to teach. This research will provide the necessary stakeholders with information about the currency of the joint board teacher education primary program that is being offered in the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States. Here are some of the research questions. What are beginning Vincentian elementary teachers' perceptions about their overall preparedness to teach mathematics? When considering their preparedness, what do beginning Vincentian elementary teachers identify as key factors influencing their early career mathematics regarding their content knowledge? When considering their preparedness, what do beginning Vincentian elementary teachers identify as key factors influencing their early career mathematics regarding pedagogical knowledge? This research uses three theories: pedagogical content knowledge, signature pedagogies, and problem-based learning as a theoretical framework to explore the main research question based on several assumptions. Since this research is about beginning mathematics teachers, using pedagogical content knowledge has helped me to identify whether these beginning teachers can orchestrate teaching and learning opportunities that are centered on specific ways of knowing and doing within mathematics. Pedagogy content knowledge is deeply rooted in a teacher's everyday work. Furthermore, this research includes signature pedagogies theory to explore those established and shared conception of the teaching of mathematics by focusing on the common but complex purposes of the subjects which governs how the content should be taught. And because this research involved a detailed examination of beginning teachers' behaviors and activities as they engage in the teaching of mathematics, problem-based learning theory was essential to help me maintain my focus on the relationships and interaction within the teaching and learning of mathematics within the authentic setting of the classroom. Some of the emerging themes from literature includes challenges of beginning teachers, mathematics teachers' belief, pre-service teachers' belief, and experiences in teacher education program. Because of time, I'm just going to focus on the last one. Pre-service teachers' self-efficacy is an essential motivation construct that shape their effectiveness in the mathematics classroom. Pre-service teachers with a high level of teacher self-efficacy are more resilient in their mathematics teaching and are likely to try harder to help all students to reach their full potentials. In contrast, pre-service teachers with low self-efficacy are less likely to try harder to reach the mathematical learning needs of all their future students. This research is informed by the constructivist paradigm. This study used a qualitative method, multiple case study designed to explore beginning teachers' perception of their experiences with applying mathematics teaching and learning. Why a qualitative approach? A qualitative approach I found to be most appropriate for this study because it fosters a better understanding of the participants' lived experiences and their understanding of how and why they teach the way they do. This study will allow participants to articulate their beginning teaching and learning experiences in mathematics. The use of rich critical descriptions provide in-depth detailed accounts of participants' experiences. If you look at the map here, you would see St. Vincent and the Grenadines have multiple school districts. And that is why I selected a multiple case study. If I zoom in a bit, just to show you, we have over 13 districts. But for this study, the study was focused on two schools in District 6 and one school from District 8. And the reason for that, St. Vincent's divided between Windward and Leeward end, and we have the central part. So I decided to select a school from the eastern end of St. Vincent, which is the Windward end, a school from the Leeward end, which is in District 8, and one from the central end, which is in the middle of the District 6. These cases provide a greater representation of beginning math teachers' perspectives, as samplers from different schools will provide in-depth knowledge of the issues and an understanding of the patterns that emerge from different angles. All right, this is a case study, and we know a case study is defined as a research, as a bounded system, bounded in both time and place. And in terms of time, this study was collected, the data for the study was collected from November 2022, and data was collected up until June 2023. Data collection included interviews. 18 interviews was conducted, both pre and post interviews. In school observation, over 36 in school observation were done. Field notes on in-school observation, as well as artifacts. These artifacts included teacher-generated artifacts in the form of 36 lesson plans, teaching aids, and reflections. To analyze data, I utilized the Creswell six steps in analyzing and interpreting data. And these include preparing and organizing the data, reading and looking for general impression, exploring and coding the database, using the codes to generate description categories, themes for analysis, representing and reporting findings, interpreting the meaning of findings, and validating the accuracy of findings. Now, what are some of the major findings? Some of the major findings include participants maintain a favorable perception of their teacher education program. However, what was more significant is that participants were facing the most challenging area that participants highlighted was placement issues. For example, teachers who were trained at the secondary level because of limited human resources in St. Vincent and limited job opportunities, some of them were placed in at the elementary level to teach. Also, you found that teachers who were trained in the technical vocation education program was also placed at the elementary level. We also found that problems where teachers who were trained at the elementary level were placed at the early childhood level. So these problems really are structural constraints that extend beyond the teacher education program and participants themselves. And therefore, we have some recommendations that there's need for structural induction programs for beginning teachers of mathematics. There's also a great need for mentorship and coaching programs at the elementary level, a need for continuous professional development, and more so, there's a need at the teacher education program for seminars and short courses, because all teachers are trained at one institution. However, we know our problem in St. Vincent in terms of limited human resources, but there are no provision made for teachers to take extra courses like in mathematics so that they are better prepared when they are placed at the elementary level. And I want to thank you so much. I know it was a rush because I wanted to get everything done, but hopefully when you ask your question, I can shed more light. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Samantha.
Hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure for me to be with you to share with you some insights when it comes to my work as a community development practitioner. And one of the key insights that I would like to share with you is regarding church engagement for transformative impact. And I would like to, I have entitled my my presentation as from hopelessness to hopefulness. And I would like to share with you some of the things that I have learned, during my journey that started 20 years ago. I remember when I completed grad school, I went back to Haiti, and I had the privilege of working with different community development organizations, and one of the experience really shaped my understanding of development and the role of the church in the process. I remember I was invited to lead a community development session with 200 leaders. And it was a very difficult community. And I remember that time we invited the leaders to meet with us in a chapel, and there were 200 of them, and I was the key facilitator. And I remember starting my presentation by asking them to share with me the stories about the community, how the community used to be 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, just to really understand, what happened in the context of the community, to really understand why they are facing this current situation. And they taught me how the community used to be so flourishing. And then afterward, it came to a point where I asked them, what's your preferred community? Where do you guys see yourself, 10, 15 years, 20 years from now? And that's when they started dreaming about, such a beautiful community where they would like to see themselves living in. And then we came to a point where I asked them, what are the resources that you have that can, get you to living that dreaming, that vision that you have. And that's when, they told me, Leslie, there's something that you need to understand. There is nothing that we have in this community to change around our situation. And in fact, you have all the resources, you have the foreigners with you, you have the education. If you want to do something for us, you just do it. I need to tell you that when they taught me that, I was really surprised, because I know that I was dealing with leaders. And when you are meeting with leaders, you want to make sure that there is hope. You want to make sure that the leaders really understand that, things are in their hands, and they are the resources, and they should be able to move forward. But in fact, when they told me that, that's when I realized that, we have a situation, because when leaders lose hope, there's nothing left. And in such a situation, I was, I was really puzzled, asking myself, what is it that I should do next? And that's really at that time that I realized that poverty, it has a lot to do with mindset, has a lot to do with culture. And this is when really I understood that there has to be a right relationship. And this is what I have learned, and which I wanted to share with you. Number one, uh, my understanding is that, when people do not have the right relationship with God, the right understanding of who God is, the understanding of the Judeo-Christian values, it makes it difficult for them to thrive. And as I'm thinking about Judeo-Christian values, I'm thinking about free enterprise. I'm thinking about the pursuit of integrity and these types of things. And I realized that, when the understanding is not there, when people are not aware of those values, it makes it difficult for them moving forward. And I'm not sure I'm the first one who really discovered that, because that was technically the main thesis of Max Weber, some 100 years ago, who really was studying the reality of different countries that were exposed to Judeo-Christian values, and countries that were not exposed to Judeo-Christian values. And you could see, the difference in terms of worldview that would be conducive to development. So therefore, number one, not only the right relationship, but also the right order, relationship with God, and secondly, relationship with self. During the previous presentations, we learned how identity is so important, and people need to have the right relationship with themselves, by understanding who they are, having that sense of identity. And as I'm talking, I'm thinking about Eugene O'Neill, who said that none of us can help with the things that life has done to us. And when these things are done, they make us do other things until there is a gap between who we are and who we would love to be, and we have lost our true selves forever. So therefore, there is a need for people to have the right relationship, to have that can-do mindset, to believe that, they have been endowed with gift and talents, and therefore they have responsibility. They have to get involved in moving things in the right direction. So that's why I really love, Paul's presentation earlier, when he talked about the fact that people are created in the image of God, and because of that, they have inherent dignity. They have absolute values and dignity, and having that kind of understanding really put someone in the right direction when it comes to going to the next level. And the other thing that's important in terms of relationship is relationship with others. That's what most economists would call social capital. It's important for people to have good relationship with other people, people that they can rely on, people that they can connect with. No man's an island. That's what we say. So it's important having that kind of relationship really can help. And I'm going to be talking about one of the organizations that I have worked with that has tried to organize people into savings group, how that has quite a difference, when it comes to transforming people. And the other relationship is relationship with the creation. And this is when it is so important for people to consider themselves as steward, that the creation has been given to us by God. So therefore, we have the responsibility to make sure that we are a good steward. We multiply the resources that God has endowed to our care. So going back to our story, when the leaders actually told me that there is nothing that they could do, my initial reaction was to tell them, if you guys believe that there is nothing that you can do to change your situation, I believe that we have been wasting our time. And that's when, some members in the audience said, wait a minute, what do we mean that we have nothing? One of the young men said that we have me. I'm a young person. I'm studying economics, and I'm a community resource. And another one shouted, yes, we have some empty building. We have nurses in the community. Maybe we can start a clinic. all of a sudden they realized that they were living, in a rich environment. They just need to get themselves together, to do something. And we started a few programs in this community, and leadership program, microfinance program, all the nice initiatives that we have started. However, programs were really short-lived because a couple of years ago, everything would collapse. And this is when we recognized there was one missing ingredient. Because whenever we're talking about, community development, usually we see players like the international non-governmental organizations. We think about private sector. We think about some community-based organization, but not really the church. And that's when, we realized that, what was missing in our program was the church. The church wasn't involved. But it feels like for some people, the church wasn't involved because the church wasn't ready to get involved. And in fact, that's one of the findings, from the work that we have done. So we realized that the church was operating with what we call an angelic theology, where there were very little interest in earthly matters, weak influence on culture, and a fatalistic mindset. And it boils down to a lack of relevancy, for the church. And that's why the church wasn't involved. And that's when, as we were processing the reality of the church, we were investigating what is it that we could do to help the church, considering more holistic ministry, because that's what the issue was. Because most of the programs in the church were programs designed to help people only spiritually. The complete man wasn't really taken into account in the picture. And that's when we really, we started to tap into what the church was doing better in a sense of bearing witness to respond to the Great Commission. That's one of the things that we have supported the local church in. But also we help the church understand that they have to be more relevant. They have to be more present when it comes to addressing people's needs, because that's what we see in the early church, where there were women that were neglected at some point, widows that were neglected, and the church leaders stepped up to address the problem. So that's why we had the institution of the deacons. So therefore, we have started a few programs to make sure that the church would not only address issues that are spiritual, but also issues that have to do with culture, issues that have to do with economic development. And one of the ministries that I've been involved in is a savings group program, which we have been implementing in a number of countries, 20 different countries so far. And Haiti was one of these countries. Now I'm doing the same program in West Africa, where people have the opportunity to put their resources together and solving their problem together, and just making sure that they have more resilient communities where one person can support another. That's one of the interventions that we have done, just to make sure that the church would be more holistic in the way that it is approaching certain issues. The third involvement was, how do we get the church to engage in the battle of ideas? And this is where, apologetics, was really useful. Actually, in my presentation, I omit to mention that I had the privilege of having some teachers at Biola University that really shaped some of the programs that we have put together in Christian apologetics. And that was a way for us to make sure that the church was ready to get involved, ready to participate, for the church to have a voice, for the church to be perceived as not only preaching the gospel, which is important, this is the number one responsibility of the church, but for any transformative impact, the church should consider a more holistic ministry. And this is what we have been doing, and we have seen a lot of changes taking place in the sense that people, people's needs being addressed by the local church, and the local church being more assertive, when it comes to different issues, different objections, to the Christian faith that the church was addressing back then. So, looking at, the different programs that we have been able to implement, I can say that there has been a lot of progress, but still much needs to be done. And but so far, what we have investigated and the conclusion from our work has been, when it comes to community development, it's important for the church to be considered as a key player in the process. However, the church has to be structured. The church has to be equipped so that they can get involved and participate effectively in the process. So thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions and comments, it would be a pleasure for me to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Leslie. And thank you so much to all of our presenters. They did an excellent job. Brother Aaron, I don't know if he is still on, but he had a question, a huge question, and I'm going to read it. And
Yeah, he's here.
I believe it may have been addressed to Kimberly, but he can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It said, in light of Psalm 8, he was curious of how Psalms 104's cosmocentric view all informs humankind's identity and purpose for the earth, land, and creation. How is our and is shaped and enhanced? How does it balance value and uniqueness with our interconnection and smallness? And if anyone else has another question, write it in the chat. Wow. I believe that's addressed to Kimberly. Is that right, Aaron?
Hi, Sister Felicia. Thank you. That was for Paul, actually.
Okay.
In light of Paul mentioning Psalm 8.
Okay.
Helpful, almost reification of our purpose, value, and identity. So, Paul, if you'd like to speak to that. Thank you, Sister Felicia. I didn't expect it. Wow.
Yeah, thanks for that. I actually saw the question. I got an opportunity to read it.
All right.
Psalm 104. I mean, I can offer some thoughts on the question. So I think let me just locate your question again, just to get one part of it. Yes.
I can attempt to re-ask it. Thank you so much for
go
your
again. Yeah, go again, please.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Thank you for your research. I actually did not expect to talk about it. My question essentially is, with Psalm 8 on the one hand, emphasizing man's value and purpose, how do you think Psalm 104 can also emphasize how our purpose is connected to creation more broadly? So that on the one hand, it emphasizes our uniqueness, yet on the other hand, our interconnection and in a sense, our smallness. So
okay, I get you now. So this is a very, very good question. So in looking at Psalm 104, there's a strong emphasis I get on the creation. There's a strong emphasis on particularly how God has a very strong role. I mean, he is overall, but it goes a bit more in depth than even Psalm 8 or even Psalm 19. But I think how it can help is, whereas Psalm 8, well, a bit of Psalm 8, I think speaks to that. So in Psalm 8, the psalmist starts out by saying, mentions, when I look on all of these things, what is man that you're mindful of him? There is a strong sense in which you're humbled, I think, by your place in this world. It doesn't necessarily elevate you to the space of saying, this is who I am, in a proud sense. I think it humbles you that when you look on all of this, there's this huge, vast, lovely thing about creation, and then God puts man in and gives him this particular unique role. And so it's humbling. And I think part of the humbling comes in Psalm 8, where he mentions that you have made him. And I think that's always helpful, where it basically reminds us or reminds us of our creatureliness, as someone once phrased it, but also the fact that because we're created, we're dependent. We are dependent. And I think Psalm 104 joins in that, where it reminds us who ultimately is in control of everything. And though we're given a measure of dominion, it's still limited to his authority. And so, yes, there is purpose. Yes, there is a sense of identity. But a bigger part of that identity, in looking on both Psalms, I think, is a sense of, since we are created, we are utterly dependent on God for all of life. And you see it in Psalm 104, where everything else is sustained by his hand, and we are no different. So that's, I think, how these passages can complement each other. That's what comes to mind, at least.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, thanks for the question.
There was a question earlier in the chat, I believe, LaTricia, about the population of the respondents of Black expectant fathers, and what was the basis for selecting that population?
Yes, I can do that real quick. Thank you, Brother Hugh Gordon, for that question. So I kind of converted this into a bit more of an approachable message, but I will share some of the facts, because thank you for asking that. So so for the majority, about 60% of the 102 respondents were Black parents from Detroit. And then the remainder there's like a 30%, actually, it's not right. 25%, I'll pull up my document in a second here. 25% white or European American, 5% Latino American, and there's a small number as well. Some of those white American numbers were also representative of Arab American folks, but there was some blurring in the data given that piece. And the basis for the population was the full study, called Baby on Board, was designed to work with and sort of study expectant parents and expectant couples in those partnerships, to sort of ask them questions about what they're looking forward to with their child and their baby. So that is that's it. Happy to answer any more questions or share anything else that could be sent out in an email. So
does anyone have any questions for here's a brother Lawick. I hope I'm not butchering your name. I know it's not a question, it's just a statement. Does anyone else have a question for any of our other presenters?
I had a question for Kim. The whole issue of identity, I thought, was fascinating in how to care for both Black men and Black women in ministry. And if she wanted to just share a little bit more about what she found there in the responses for people for Black men, Black women, Christians working in organizations, in white spaces, the issue of stress, etc., and how identity tied in. And I suppose I could ask the same question. Almost everybody mentioned the issue of identity in their various areas of research. It was fascinating. So can you just share a little bit more about what you found there?
Yeah, it's actually been a while since I did this project. So actually my memory leaves me. So I don't fully remember. I'm trying to think. So I think some of the other things people talked about, leadership development came through really clear, and just some of the experiences that people had. And I think that there particularly for Black women, they had just some really hard experiences dealing with white men, I think. And so there's something around, sorry, my nose started running right before you.
That's okay.
But there was something around that disconnect of kind of their experiences with white men and just those two cultures.
Okay.
I think what was really helpful for Black women was just again having spaces that just affirmed them, for who they are. I like to say God made you who you are on purpose. And so I think Black women being able to have spaces that help them live into that, like live into who God made them, and speaking that it's okay for you to be who you are, how you are, that God wants to use that for leadership, for the organization, things like that. But yeah, there was really just, I think it turned out a lot of times there was just a disconnect between those two cultures. And so Black women just needed some safe spaces to engage with that and kind of receive some healing for that.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for.
Yes, just a little bit more. Thank you. There's a question in the chat.
Paul, yes, okay, you got it.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Paul has a question, either to LaTricia
For both of them, yeah.
Kimberly, or I guess both of them, about the issue of the imposter syndrome among Black women. And what has come up about that in your research? But Kimberly just spoke of it, if LaTricia would like to say something.
Sure.
And then Kimberly, if you have something else to add to that.
So I think maybe a short description of imposter syndrome would be when someone has an accomplishment or is maybe on the edge of one, and then but they feel as if they have no right to be there, and so they feel that they're an imposter, that they're pretending, or that for some reason they just barely made it in, and that other people are miles ahead of them. And so that's a general experience that people describe having, and that many women speak to, and many Black women speak to experiencing. So I think that, and there's plenty of research done on this too. So if you Google imposter syndrome research, you'll find some good stuff. But that, as people describe it this way, I think what I like to say to people is that you're not, nobody is an imposter. If you're there, it's because you're intended to be there. And many people do not feel that they are imposters, just as Kim described so profoundly in her study and her research. There are many people who assume that they belong there when other people have maybe a different kind of inheritance and right to be there instead. So you're not an imposter, and we're not imposters. Most of us have done more than enough to end up in a certain place. But it's important to help people feel like they belong, and belonging needs to show up, because much of the time it's really a systemic issue that the thing that somebody's walking into or experiencing is not designed to hold all of their gifts in the way that would best serve and honor them. So that's my quick spiel about imposter syndrome. I'm not sure if others have more to share, because I think there are probably a few experts in the room about this one today.
I just say amen to what LaTricia says.
I wonder if Samantha could comment a little bit on that, because I think the issue of imposter syndrome would come up in STEM education, teaching, and then for elementary school teachers, teaching math, and the importance of that in even feeling prepared to teach the subject area. Did you find anything about imposter syndrome coming up in your research, Samantha?
No, I didn't. But I could understand the feeling, especially given our history, and especially for mathematics, where there's a stigma and the attachment, well, in the Caribbean is still being seen as a male-dominated area. And having a female venturing into those fields, you could feel, like you're an imposter, you don't belong.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But it didn't come up in my study. Well, thanks for asking.
Sure.
Well, do we have any more questions we can entertain? Maybe one or two more questions before we close out. If anyone has a burning question on their mind.
I wanted Dr. I should let somebody else ask a question, but for Dr. Leslie to say a little bit more too about working with leaders, political, church leaders, etc., and the whole issue of identity, imposter syndrome, creating hope. If he can speak a little bit more about that too, from his work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Denise. Actually, our work with the leaders have been really to empower them. That was the main focus by going back to the 4 relationships that I have mentioned earlier, having that right relationship with God, right relationship with self. So we figured out that the relationship with self is one of the areas where we have been really putting the focus on. Because this is, I mean, once someone has that right understanding of who they are and created in the image of God, having that absolute dignity, and that really allows them to really understand that they have responsibility. So this is where I can really see how identity is really key, when it comes to someone, going to the next level, taking ownership, taking responsibility for what's happening, and going forward. So yeah, it has been also important when it comes to relationship with others. So that's when we organize people into savings group, where we have a group of 15 to 25 people. They agree to meet on a regular basis. It could be once a week or twice a month. And when they meet, they practice something that we call the 5 W's. The first W is welcome. The second one is worship. They worship together. The third one is word. They study the word of God. And the fourth one is work. This is when they put their resources together, and they also have like an emergency funds so that they can help any member of the group that may be facing some kind of financial struggle. And the last one is wrap up. So we have seen really people having that sense of identity, not only personally, but also collectively, because now they are part of a group that is considered their family, and this is how they thrive. And this is how they can, even at this point, go into the last relationship, which is relationship with the environment. So that's what we've observed so far. And yeah, so it's been a great journey.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Hugh Gordon. Thank you for all the presentations.
Your time out. Melissa.
We're out.
Oh, go ahead, Brother Gordon. Or you have a question? Or sorry.
Go ahead if you had a question.
Oh, I did place it in the chat. It's a general question to Dr. Jules and all. So when a leader, quote unquote, loses hope, can't someone rise up to be another leader and consider the period of the judges in the Bible?
This is a very deep question. I can take a shot. From what we have seen, going back to that meeting, when the leaders said, there's nothing that they can do, they don't have the resources, they don't have the means, and my first reaction was to give up. But I realized that wasn't the best one, and it was really in that moment that I can say that the Spirit of God stepped up and created that vision. And that's when some members of the audience they reminded me, no, what do we mean that we are poor? We're not poor, we have resources. I think having that sense of vision is really critical for a leader, because that's really the raw material that a leader start to work. And I think also this is really the work of the Spirit when it comes to endowing leaders and making sure that they rise to the occasion. The leaders in the womb that really recognize that there is something that they could contribute. I would say that it had nothing to do with my facilitation skills at that point, but rather, the Spirit,
The Holy Spirit.
their minds, and so that they can make a contribution. That's a great question.
Well, thank you all so much for being here and engaging with this group of scholars. And we want to thank each of them for their great contribution to this program tonight and all the things that they gave to us. Let's give them a good shout out, round of applause, or whatever y'all want to do on your little reaction thing. We have Sister Emily Lambert, who is going to close us out in prayer for everyone. I want to really, in addition to the panelists that are here, I want to thank our former colleague, Dr. Denise Ross Haynes, for being on the programs tonight. It's so good to see you.
Yes.
And always a pleasure to
thank you. Thank you. Love you guys.
Love you. And we thank God for the presence of Dr. Nathan Charles, who's been with us in many meetings also. And we thank God for him being here tonight also. I will turn it over to Sister Emily to finish if Pastor Gary, Dr. Denise don't have anything else to add. Would you all like to say anything else before we close?
Just thank you to everyone for coming. Please look out for announcements for our next sharing, our scholarship is in January. We have 2 faculty from Tuskegee University and Biola University, and hopefully a 3rd one from Howard, who will be sharing in January. But listen out, because we'll be sharing in our local areas in Jamaica, across CARIFES, across Africa over the next several months, and I'm sure they'd appreciate us joining in and listening to them share their scholarship too. So thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks so much for enduring the time difference too, for those
yes.
of you who joined us from other places.
Yeah, we have several from Africa joining in this evening.
So good. So good.
Several hours ahead.
All right, Sister Emily, if you close us out, next few
Absolutely.
minutes. Thank you.
Oh man, God, I just thank you for bringing us here this evening to hear about how you are working in the different corners of research and academia in just your people across our globe. Thank you for giving the right words for these different presenters to share about the vast things that I'm sure that they are studying and that they wanted to share with us. God, I thank you for Kimberly's research within the InterVarsity organization. God, I pray that work would continue in learning how can the organization partner better well with its staff that are of African and Black descent. And God, I thank you also for LaTricia and the new position that you have given her. I pray for continued opportunity for her own research. God, thank you for showing us in her own what she has learned, that she has taught to us. And God, I thank you also for Samantha's sharing and her completion of her PhD. God, I pray that you would continue to give her the strength and resources to be able to finish that well. And God, also for Leslie and his his new program that he is starting for Christian apologetics. God, would you send the right students to that program, and would it strengthen their faith to proclaim boldly their faith in you in this postmodern era? And God, for Paul, God, I ask that you would bring him funding to his research, that it could go to more places. It has blessed Christianity Today. And God, I pray that it would bless other places and publications as well with that new funding for his research. And we thank you, God, for just the ways that you are going to continue celebrating with us in your scholarship that you have put in the hearts of these different students who are curious about what it is that you have to teach them. God, we thank you for just the faithfulness of the people here on this Zoom call and listening and learning. I pray that curiosity would follow us through for however long you have us following you, Jesus.
Yeah.
Would that curiosity grow and celebrating more of what it is that we're learning as we follow you in this life. In your name we pray. Amen.